Okay, thank you and good morning, and again, thank you for inviting me along. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to go through quite a pace this morning. There's quite a bit to get through, and I'm also informed that after 15 minutes a trapdoor opens and I disappear, so I'm very much timed. So, as Marika was saying there, I'm from Leeds Teaching Hospitals. It's one of the largest organisations, NHS trusts, and Ravid mentioned this morning work that we're doing in terms of innovation and so forth within the hospital. So I think what I want to try and do is set the scene about the procurement landscape, both within the NHS nationally and also what we're doing at a local level. So I'm very much involved in operational procurement. Go on. Fine, okay, all right. Thank you. National Health Service goes without saying, very, very large organisation. I think we're the fourth largest employer in the world today. And again, providing free care, the principle of providing free care at all scales of healthcare, emergency through to community, as it were. I think it's important just to understand the flow of cash, the money that comes through. So obviously the Department of Health is funded to the tune, if you take 14, 15, 105 billion pounds, of which ultimately 22 billion pounds of that is non-pay spend going out into supplies of goods and services. The way that we received remuneration at an operational level changed in April 2013 with the introduction of commissioners, clinical commissioning groups. So the budget is effectively handed down to NHS commissioners now, and we have to almost bid for work, the contracts that they put out. We as an acute provider sat down at the bottom there, will bid for that work. Now they are able to go elsewhere. They can go to other qualified providers if they so feel. So it's a competitive market that we're working in against other NHS organisations and other NHS trusts. That's the basic structure. NHS Leeds sits within the 160. So each one of these trusts is a separate organisation in its own right, making its own decisions around investment, finance, procurement. And is free to, the way I would paint the picture really from a procurement point of view is that the NHS is almost a brand, and you've got companies working under the brand that are making decisions around procurement, what they will buy and how they will buy. Clearly we have standards to adhere to, national standards, performance standards, etc. But we're pretty much free to operate as a company under that banner. So the procurement strategy that has been released, or was released August last year, recognised that we need to improve the efficiencies of procurement within the NHS, and we set a target of saving about 1.5 billion over the next 3 years. There were some identifiable opportunities presented from procurement to procurement, a couple of those being, it was recognised that our clinical engagement model was poor. We do our commercial work, but we don't work very well with our own clinicians. And we've set around how we can introduce a programme to work much more closely with clinicians within the NHS to help improve procurement flows. Linked to that, our own capabilities recognised that procurement needed a more formal training programme. If you look at the major suppliers, they invest a lot of money in training of their own workforce on commercials, and we as a procurement body spend very little, so to build up our procurement capabilities. I think important to understand, looking back, procurement is very much concentrated on what is the purchase price, what do we pay, can we get the product cheaper? We're not really interested in what I call below the waterline, understanding the impact on the patient, understanding the impact on clinical efficiencies, looking at the patient pathway and the budget flow of the patient. If we take a typical patient flow within Leeds, the patient is touching up to 8 different budgets as they come through the pathway, and we need to understand that so that where we're intervening technologies, what impact does that have across that flow in those budgets? So we're now starting to look very much about the cost below the waterline and start to take those whole costs into consideration. Another important one is just to reiterate supply chain. We need to be very, very conscious. We have, in recent years, we've been looking at supply chains moving further over into the east, and I think we as the NHS have found, yes, we've got some reduced costs, but we've had some major interruption to supply issues in the NHS through disasters that have happened over in the east. So we're now looking at more sustainable local European supply chains. Very important factor that when we're looking at allocation of business, that we've got product is relatively close at hand. So Leeds Teaching Hospital, as I say, large 5 sites across the city, hosting St James's University Hospital, which is still the largest teaching hospital in Europe today. And we're about 1% of the total NHS turnover. And the non-pay spend that is attributed to that organisation is about £300 million today. That sort of percentage split is typical of any large NHS organisation, NHS trust today. So about 30% goes on non-pay. And again, those allocations of that 300 into those 4 areas, supplies, pathology, pharmacy, estates, is not untypical in terms of a percentage. For my point of view, I look after the £160 million, which is medtech, consumables, capital. We have a separate pharmacy procurement unit, as we actually run a regional pharmacy procurement unit out of Leeds, and we're moving pathology over in the next few months. So I think the key point there is we're very much a widget-based organisation, lots of products, 25,000 lines required to support a hospital of this size. So we need to ensure that we've got a fairly slick procurement function to enable those products from sourcing right the way through to effectively payment of those goods and services. And today we're working with about 300 suppliers to provide all those goods. So how do we go about allocating that business out to the supply base? Well, the first thing to say is that, again, alongside all the other NHS trusts, we're not mandated to use any contracts whatsoever that are open to us. We have a free rein as to how we allocate that business, how we procure those goods and services through into the hospitals. And this causes a lot of confusion in the marketplace. And unfortunately, it is a fairly complex route to market. So from our point of view, we've got 4 principal routes to getting those services and goods in. First and foremost, we do local trust procurement, so local trust tenders, going out to the market, advertising through European legislation, European OJU. They tend to be the higher technology value products where we require the relationship very much with the supplier. We wouldn't want to use a third party or an agent or a distributor. We want to have that direct relationship. And from Leeds' point of view, that's about 75 million turnover. More latterly, there's been the introduction of regional procurement hubs, so that is trying to get common products bought regionally. So we're part of a group purchasing organisation within Yorkshire, where we will put in generic products. And in principle, that works well. The problem we have, unfortunately, with that is, of course, we're a fairly large, acute, major teaching hospitals, and we're working with smaller hospitals, so some of the products mix is somewhat different. And we always have this argument, who's got the voting rights when it comes to allocation of business? Should we have a greater percentage of sway? Unfortunately, when we go into these markets, we're all equal. So sometimes it causes a little bit of a problem, even though we're a larger percentage of spend. Very important, we have, you may have heard about NHS Supply Chain. That's an organisation that is run for the NHS by DHL. They're, again, a central procurement organisation that buy in bulk. They have a central distribution set of 7 warehouses nationally. They buy in bulk, and then we buy from NHS Supply Chain. It's pick, pack and dispatch, as I call it, so they'll break bulk down and they'll deliver to unit level. That's great from our point of view, because even though we're a large teaching hospitals, the one thing that we don't have is any storage space, any stores. We're a just-in-time service, so what we receive today will be out on the wards today, will be consumed tomorrow. So theatres, for instance, has a 24-hour turnaround. We have products coming in 7 days a week at the moment. We don't have stock beyond that 24-hour period, and so hence the supply chains need to be absolutely aligned to the product flow, if that makes sense. So supply chain is critical to our organisation. We spend about £30 million with NHS Supply Chain, but it tends to be high volume, low value product, commodity type product, where you can imagine it's bulk, pick, pack and out to ward and theatre levels. There's a couple of other distributors there that you may have heard of, Bundle and Squadron, that we use, but the largest one is NHS Supply Chain. And the other thing to mention is that each, if you like, the demand for all of those products is electronic. So it's using barcodes, using handheld readers, so we've got people going out, reading barcodes, and collating the demand and feeding that through to supply chain. So we've tried to take paper out of the system as much as possible. And then lastly, of course, being a public body, we're able to use some of the pan-government frameworks that are open to public sector. So we buy a lot of energy, agency staff through the national government frameworks. Already covered off, as I say, NHS Supply Chain, easy to use, breaks bulk, so I think that's fair to say. A critical part of the supply chain, but again, one that we choose to use as opposed to mandated to use. So what are the rules around procurement that we need to adhere to? Clearly, we have to follow the EU procurement legislation. And for us in the hospital, that means any contract value, irrespective of duration, over £111,000 sterling, we have to advertise through the TED process. Now, what that unfortunately means is, from our point of view, it's a fairly lengthy process. It takes on average 6 months. So what we've ended up doing is breaking our work plan into 3 years. So we take the work plan of about £150 million for the contracts. We do £50 million per year over a 3-year period. So that means the average contract duration is about 3 years. It's a process. It shouldn't put us off going to the market, but it's a process you need to be aware of. Obviously, we have to be transparent. We have to put those out to the market, but we very much need to follow the process that's set in front of us. Within our own organisation, again, being a public body, we're accountable for every pound that we spend. Not only do we publish every NHS organisation on their own website, NHS Trusts will publish their spend data. Any procurement over, any payments over £25,000, if you're interested as to who's spending on what, if you go onto the website, somewhere within the website there will be the published data of what we are spending and with whom. Not on what, but who with at the moment. So we're very open in terms of what we're doing. But of course, from a procurement point of view, we also need to ensure that we're meeting our own standing financial instructions. So we take that down a further level to a tender point of view. So anything over £25,000 needs a tender. within our own organisation. Usually a minimum of 3, but it's a much quicker process. You're talking weeks as opposed to months within that. And again, the Department of Health are pushing for further transparency of all our business. So again, we're being encouraged, I would say, not mandated at the moment, but to advertise any opportunity in the NHS over £10,000 through the website I put there, the Contracts Finder website. So anything that we're putting out over and above that will go on to Contracts Finder. So the Department of Health published a data strategy for procurement. I think the couple of things that stand out for me there that we need to be aware of. If we're going to link, and it's a big aim of the NHS, we want to link patient to product. So we've got full track and traceability of product through to patient. And at the moment, the key to doing that is having barcodes, not only on the patient, but also having a barcode on the products that we're procuring. So the NHS has issued a mandate that we want to move to GS1, Global Standards 1, barcoding standards for all products coming into the NHS. So all of a sudden we've got a one-to-one relationship. GS1 is a not-for-profit organisation, very well known in the retail world, not so well known obviously in the medtech world, but we are getting there. I mean, when we looked at some recent data where we'd introduced some barcoding demand management systems, we realised that some of our implants had 10 different barcodes on the same implant. The same part number had 10 different barcodes. So of course when you go to issue that, to link that to patient, so not only have we got cost, we've got patient safety issues that we're trying to address in terms of linking together. You go to the database and it doesn't recognise the barcode. It would be like going to the retail and swiping your goods through the checkout. You know, you just wouldn't, as a customer, you wouldn't stand for it. So as a customer, we're now moving forward to request suppliers to use the GS1 barcoding standards. I think the other, all tenders go out electronically, so each organisation will have their own tender system for publishing tenders. I think the only other thing to talk about is, again, we're wanting to move to a national supplier managed catalogue. So rather than every organisation in the NHS managing their own catalogues, if you think about the millions of items that we potentially all buy, we want to move to a global synchronised network of catalogues so that the supplier deposits their data in at this level with all the generic attributes to their products, and then we, as a customer, can draw that down into our own catalogues and contracts. So that's something we're looking to develop over the next 6 to 12 months, and we would be asking suppliers to work alongside us with that. And then finally, price benchmarking, a bit of an emotive subject, given that we're actually, in one respect, competing with other NHS organisations, but on the second side of the fence, we're being asked to share all our pricing and procurement pricing with the rest of the NHS. I think from a personal point of view, benchmarking is good in terms of informing you as a market position, but shouldn't be used as an absolute tool to beat the supplier over the head that you've been selling at one price here and therefore I demand that price here. The way we use the product, the volumes all dictate the price at the end of the day. So, but price benchmarking and openness is coming within the NHS. So again, people need to be aware of that. I'll not dwell too much on this, but I think we've already said from our point of view at a hospital level, the things we would be looking for the introductions of new innovation. And I think it's fair to say that we recognise that without, we're not going to save the £1.5 billion in the NHS by doing what we've always done. We have to introduce change. We have to introduce commercial levers with our suppliers and bring in new products to put pressure on those existing suppliers, because if we don't do that, the prices will stay where they are. Clearly, products need to be CE approved. But it goes back to that clinical data, that financial data that you know, Ravi talked about a little earlier. We will not do anything without the appropriate clinical data. You need to have that data, and if you can go through the process that we talked about this morning, from our point of view, that's great. You know, we can see that. And the financial data. We've got to understand the impact on our business of introduction of technology. And I talked about those patient pathways. We need to understand that if we're spending in theatres and the cost in theatres goes up because of the introduction of new technology, where in that patient pathway do the savings appear? And we need to be able to monitor that and pull those savings out. At the end of the day, we are a business. Whether we agree or disagree, we, as an NHS trust now, need to make a surplus. Every year we need to make a 1% surplus of our turnover to reinvest into the business. That's the mandate from government now. So we are a business, and we need to ensure that we understand the costs coming through our doors, as it were. And then lastly, as I mentioned there, sustainability. We need to ensure that the product, when we decide to go down that route, the product, the innovation, etc., that the supply chain that we've chosen is sustainable. There's no point in us switching products, switching suppliers, switching technology, and then find out in a couple of months' time the supply chain has dried up, because that costs a lot of money. And that's it, very, very briefly.
Thank you.
It didn't go much.
Thanks, Chris. So just one maybe stupid question. So how about the ICT systems in the trusts? Are they the same or in the whole NHS, or do you have different?
No, unfortunately not. This is where we're all using different finance systems to start with. So the way that we transact our purchase orders, we are looking to introduce, and I didn't go into them, but something called PEPL standards. So these are the international trading standards, if you like. So when we're pushing our data out, it comes in a standard format the suppliers understand, the right unit of measure, the right descriptions, the right... so we in Leeds use a service provided by GHX, Global Health Exchange, to ensure that we're squirting that information out to suppliers and getting the right information that you want, so that ultimately you can provide and we can pay. But also, I think it's important to link back to, if we get the catalogues right, the supplier catalogues right, and we bring that data clearly and cleanly through, really the technology system at the bottom, the finance system,
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
No. Okay. Any questions?
In the area of early drug discovery, there is a huge project called the European Lead Factory, which has a site in Dundee, and they have about 1 or 2 billion euros to spend on heat improvement, lead optimization.
Okay.
Use the microphone, please. Can you push the button there? Oh, you have to push the button.
I am talking about the European Lead Factory, which has a huge fund for sponsoring lead optimization.
Okay.
And I wonder if you have some relations to those, or
It's not
it
one
is a EU. I think it's part of IMI, an IMI initiative.
Okay. It's not one I'm familiar with, to be fair.
It's pretty new, but they have good conditions if you have a compound you believe in.
Okay.
Jeppe?
Yes, Chris. You said you had some objectives to improve the costs over the years, and I understand that. How are you, as an organization, measured on the clinical efficiency parameters that a product may cause? I may come to you with a more expensive product, which may increase the purchasing value, which is counteracted by an efficiency parameter below the surface. How is that handled in the system?
Correct. And it goes back to understanding where that efficiency is realised. So do we realise that within the hospital? So bed stays, early discharge, so there's a clear saving to us, and we can measure that. Unfortunately, in many instances, the technology and the innovation means that the benefit is realised by the commissioner down the line, and therefore the cost savings, readmittance, revisions down the, in 3, 4, 5 years' time, the savings are out there. So we are now starting the dialogue, not only within our own environment, within the hospital, but with commissioners. And we are talking to commissioners about funding for such new innovations, so the benefit is realised, as I say, down the line, the cost benefit down there, and we are seeing funding coming into the NHS or into the trust, additional funding for specific products and devices that allows us to put high cost in that we don't really benefit in our spell, but clearly the benefit to the patient is there and the benefit longer term to health economy is there. Yeah.
I think this is key
Yeah.
for the whole system to
Absolutely.
survive.
And the introduction of the commissioners, the CCGs as we call them, in 2013, those relationships are now developing, and we're now starting to see, obviously, the commissioners talking to us about patient pathways, the cost of the patient pathways. In the early days, that didn't happen. It was pure transactional. Now we started to talk about devices with them and remuneration with them. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay, thank
you.
you.